When I first arrived in the Philippines, I thought I'd found everything I'd ever been looking for: warmth, simplicity, and a kind of happiness that didn't demand much. The air was thick with salt and music. People smiled without reason, and every sunset seemed to promise something better. I'd spent years chasing purpose in cold cities and crowded offices. But here, life slowed down just enough for me to breathe, or so I thought. At first, it felt like paradise. I rented a small house by the beach in Cebu, where the morning smelled of coffee and sea breeze. I'd wake early, walk barefoot to the shore, and watch fishermen pulling their nets while stray dogs played in the sand. There was a woman too, Liza, whose laughter filled every corner of my new life. She worked at a small cafe near the pier, and we met almost every day. What started as casual smiles became long conversations, and before I knew it, she had woven herself into every part of my routine. She had a way of making everything feel easy. Her English was good, but even when words failed, her eyes did the talking soft, warm, curious. She told me stories about growing up on a nearby island, about typhoons and fiestas, about her dream of one day owning a small bakery. It all sounded so innocent, so real. And after years of cynicism, I wanted to believe it. The locals treated me like family, or at least that's how it seemed. They'd wave from tricycles, offer me fruit, and call me Kuya brother. Every night, the town came alive with karaoke and rum. There were no alarms, no deadlines, no one trying to prove anything. I'd sit outside with Liza, listening to the waves and watching fireflies drift through the dark like slow-moving stars. It was the kind of peace I thought I'd never find. But paradise has a way of testing how much peace you can afford. It started small, a favor here, a little help there. Her mother was sick, she said. Hospital bills were piling up. I wanted to help. It felt cruel not to. So I sent money, not much at first. Then her cousin needed help with school. Then her father's fishing boat needed repairs. Every request was wrapped in sincerity, every plea softened by tears. It wasn't manipulation, I told myself. It was family, community, the way people cared for one another here. Months passed, and I barely noticed how much I'd given. My savings dwindled quietly, but I brushed it off. Money comes and goes, I'd say. But one morning, while I was having coffee at the cafe, I saw Liza laughing with another foreigner, an older man, balding, with sunburned skin and a wallet that looked thicker than mine. She touched his arm the same way she used to touch mine, and when our eyes met, she didn't look away. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just a customer. But doubt has a way of multiplying, especially when you've built your happiness on blind faith. That night, I asked her about it. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're just jealous, baby. Don't think too much." And somehow that was enough to silence me for a while. Weeks later, she started acting distant. Calls went unanswered, messages left on seen. The cafe closed for renovations, but I could still see her there some days, serving the same man I'd seen before. My stomach sank every time I walked past. I wanted to confront her, but part of me didn't want to know the truth. It was easier to stay in denial than to face the possibility that I'd been used. Eventually, the truth found me anyway. One afternoon, a friend I'd made, an older expat who'd lived there for years, pulled me aside. He asked how long I'd known Liza. When I told him, he sighed. "She's done this before," he said. "Different guys. Same story. She's not the only one either. It's a thing here." The words hit me like a wave. I felt sick. Everything I'd believed, the warmth, the kindness, the love, it all cracked open in an instant. I wasn't the first foreigner to fall for a dream that wasn't real. That night I walked along the beach alone. The same sea breeze that once felt comforting now tasted bitter. I kept replaying everything in my head. Her laughter, her tears, her promises. I'd built a fantasy out of her stories, and she'd let me. A few days later, I confronted her. No shouting, no accusations. Just a quiet conversation under the dim light of the pier. She didn't deny it. She only said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Maybe she didn't. Maybe she really did care, in her own way. But caring and loving aren't always the same. And paradise, I learned, isn't a place. It's a projection. A story we tell ourselves to make sense of what we want to believe. I left Cebu a week later, sold the house, packed what was left of my belongings, and boarded a flight back to Manila. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at the island's green jewels scattered across an endless sea and thought about how beauty can hide the sharpest edges. Sometimes, the cost of happiness isn't money or time. It's trust. And once that's gone, even paradise feels like a trap. When I landed in Manila, the air felt heavier not just from the smog and heat, but from the weight of everything I'd left behind. Cebu had been my escape, my illusion of peace, and now I was standing in another crowded city that seemed to mock me with its chaos. Jeepneys rattled down EDSA, vendors shouted on street corners, and the world went on as if nothing had happened. I checked into a small apartment in Makati, a few blocks away from the noise, but not far enough to feel detached. For days, I drifted, waking late, wandering aimlessly, drinking too much coffee, too much beer. I told myself I was fine, that what happened in Cebu was just a mistake, a cultural misunderstanding, a bad bet on love. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I'd gone looking for something pure, in a place I didn't understand, and in doing so, I'd lost a piece of myself. The first few weeks were quiet. I avoided people, especially other foreigners. Most of them had the same story. Different islands, different women, same ending. They laughed it off at bars, called it tuition, the price of learning the hard way. But I couldn't laugh. I wasn't angry at Liza anymore. I was angry at myself. For thinking I could buy belonging. For mistaking attention for affection. For confusing need with love. Then, one afternoon, I got a message. It was from her. "Hi, can we talk?" My chest tightened. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her fade into memory. But another part, the one that still remembered her laughter, her eyes couldn't resist. We met a few days later at a cafe in the city. She looked different, tired, thinner, but still beautiful. For a moment it felt like no time had passed at all. Then reality settled in between us like a wall. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't plan to hurt you." I nodded, but didn't say anything. She told me the man I'd seen her with had left, gone back to Australia. He'd promised her the world, and when it didn't work out, he disappeared. She was broke, staying with a cousin, trying to find work again. "I just wanted to be happy," she said. "I thought maybe with you I could be." Her words cut deeper than I expected. There was no performance this time, no tears meant to manipulate, just exhaustion. A kind of honesty that comes when there's nothing left to gain. We talked for an hour about her life, about mine, about how everything had unraveled. And when she left, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't hate her. I pitied her. Maybe we'd both been chasing the same thing, happiness, just in different currencies. After that meeting, I started writing again. It had been years since I'd put words on paper, but now the words came easily. I wrote about the ocean, the heat, the illusions we build. I wrote about trust and longing and how paradise can rot from the inside out. It wasn't therapy exactly, but it kept me sane. I found a small writing group in the city, a mix of locals and expats who met once a week in a bar above a bookstore. There was always laughter and the smell of rum and ink. One of them, a journalist named Anton, became a close friend. He'd lived in Mindanao for years, reporting on poverty, politics, and scams targeting foreigners. When I told him my story, he didn't flinch. "It's not just her," he said. "It's a whole system. The dream you bought into, that's the real trap." He explained how whole towns depended on foreign money, remittances, sponsorships, promises. It wasn't always malicious. Sometimes it was survival. "You wanted meaning," he said. "They wanted stability. Both of you reached for something the other couldn't actually give." His words stayed with me. For the first time, I saw the bigger picture not as a victim, but as part of a cycle. The foreigners came seeking simplicity, and the locals offered it, but at a cost neither side understood until it was too late. Months passed. I got a job teaching English online, started saving again, slowly rebuilding a life. The city was harsh but honest. It didn't pretend to be paradise. It was real, flawed, and alive. And maybe that was what I needed. One evening I went back to Cebu, not to see Liza, but to close the chapter properly. I rented a small motorbike and rode to the beach where I used to walk every morning. The cafe was still there, though under new management. The sea looked the same, calm, endless, pretending nothing had ever happened. I sat there for hours, watching fishermen pull in their nets, children playing in the sand. It struck me that the world doesn't care about your heartbreak. The waves will still break. The sun will still rise. The only thing that changes is what you choose to carry with you. As the sun set, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not happiness exactly, but peace, the kind that doesn't depend on anyone else's promises. Before I left, I looked at the horizon one last time and whispered, "Salamat." Not to her, not even to the country, but to the experience itself. Because sometimes the costliest mistakes are the ones that finally teach you what real happiness isn't. I moved out of Makati a year later. By then, the city had started to feel too small for all the memories I'd crammed into it. The lessons, the sleepless nights, the quiet reckonings over half-finished beers. I relocated to a quieter place in Tagaytay, high up where the air was cool and the fog rolled in like slow smoke. From my balcony, I could see Tall Volcano floating on its lake, still and deceptive, beautiful but dangerous underneath. I liked that. It felt familiar. I spent my mornings writing and my afternoons teaching. Most of my students were young professionals from across Asia, polite, eager, full of questions about life abroad. Some of them talked about moving overseas, chasing opportunities, chasing happiness. And every time I heard that word happiness, I'd pause. Because I knew now that happiness wasn't something you chased. It was something you noticed, usually when you stopped running. I was still in touch with Anton, the journalist. He'd moved on to covering corruption cases in Davao, but every few months we'd exchange long emails, half confessions, half philosophy. One night, after a few drinks, he wrote, "You ever think maybe paradise isn't a place at all? Maybe it's just a test to see if you can survive beauty without losing yourself in it. That line stayed with me. It summed up everything I'd lived through, everything I'd been too ashamed to admit. Because that was what happened to me in Cebu. I mistook beauty for truth. It's funny how over time the pain softens, but the clarity sharpens. I started turning my story into essays, small reflections about love, belonging, and self-deception. I published one anonymously online on a travel forum. I didn't expect much, but within weeks, hundreds of messages poured in, men and women, from the US, Germany, Japan, Australia, all telling the same story. Different names, same heartbreak. Some had lost money, others, marriages. One man had even sold his house back home to move to Davao for a woman who disappeared 2 months later. Reading their words was like looking into a cracked mirror, every story reflecting my own mistake in a slightly different angle. That's when I decided to give my story a name: Paradise Traps. It started as a blog, simple, raw, unpolished. I wrote about how foreigners romanticize poverty, how loneliness can make people blind, how easy it is to mistake gratitude for love. I didn't blame anyone anymore, not even Liza. I just told the truth as plainly as I could, and that honesty connected with people in a way I hadn't expected. Within a year, the blog gained traction. A small publisher reached out, asking if I'd consider turning it into a book, part memoir, part cautionary tale. I hesitated at first. Writing about pain is one thing, publishing it is another. But then I thought about all those messages, all those men and women repeating the same mistake. Maybe my story could stop someone else from losing themselves the way I did. So I said yes. The process was harder than I imagined. Every chapter was like reopening a wound, reliving the first kiss, the first lie, the first realization that I'd been fooled. But this time, I wasn't writing from anger. I was writing from distance. And with distance came understanding. When the book finally came out, it didn't sell millions, but it reached the people it needed to. I got emails from Filipinos too, some apologetic, some grateful, some defensive. One woman wrote, "Not all of us are like her, but thank you for showing the side people don't talk about." Another said, "I grew up poor in Cebu. Sometimes love and survival look the same. We don't always know which one we're choosing." That one hit me the hardest, because it was true. Months later, out of nowhere, I got a message from an unknown number. It was Liza. She'd seen the book online. She wrote, "I read your story. I'm sorry again. I hope you're happy now." I stared at her message for a long time before replying. Finally, I typed, "I am. Thank you for being part of it." And that was it. No drama, no closure speech, just quiet acceptance, two people acknowledging the wreckage that once felt like love. A few weeks later, I got invited to speak at a travel conference in Singapore. The theme was the ethics of escape. I stood on stage in front of 100 faces, travelers, digital nomads, wanderers, and told them what I'd learned. Paradise doesn't lie. We do. We lie to ourselves when we think beauty means safety. We lie when we think escape means freedom. And we lie most of all when we think love will fix the parts of us that are still broken. There was silence when I finished, then applause. Not loud or theatrical, just steady, thoughtful, human. Afterward, a young woman came up to me. She said she'd lived in Siargao for a year, fallen in love with a local surf instructor who left her when she ran out of money. She smiled sadly and said, "Your book made me feel less stupid." I smiled back and told her, "You weren't stupid. You were hopeful." that's a different thing. That night, in my hotel room overlooking Marina Bay, I opened my notebook and wrote one final line for the new edition of Paradise Traps. If you go looking for paradise, you'll find someone willing to sell it to you. The trick is learning not to buy it. I closed the notebook, looked out at the city lights, and felt the strange, quiet satisfaction that comes not from finding happiness, but from finally understanding it. It had been nearly 10 years since I first stepped onto that island in Cebu, full of naive hope and misplaced wonder. Time has a way of turning memories into myths, softening their edges until even the sharpest pains start to feel like someone else's story. But whenever I saw the ocean, even just a glimpse of it from a plane window, something in me stirred. The smell of salt, the sound of waves, they carried ghosts. After the success of Paradise Traps, I'd built a quiet life, one that finally felt my own. I split my time between writing, teaching workshops on ethical travel, and helping NGOs focused on sustainable tourism in Southeast Asia. People now came to me for advice, the same kind of people I once was. Idealists, dreamers, wanderers who thought paradise was waiting somewhere cheap and unspoiled. I told them the truth not to scare them, but to ground them. And yet, for all my wisdom, there was still one thing I hadn't done. I hadn't gone back. Every year I found a reason not to too busy, too far, too much to do. But one night, while sorting through old files, I found a folder on my laptop labeled Cebu 2015. Inside were photos I hadn't seen in years. The beach, the house, the pier, and there she was, Liza, caught mid-laugh, sun in her hair, holding a cup of coffee near the cafe window. My stomach tightened, not with pain anymore, but with a kind of quiet nostalgia. I booked a flight the next morning. When the plane descended over Mactan, I felt an odd calm. The landscape below looked the same: green islands, blue shallows, scattered boats, but I wasn't the same man who once saw them as escape routes. I was coming back not to relive, but to reconcile. Cebu had changed. There were more tourists, more condos, more resorts. The road that once led to my small beach house was now paved and lined with tricycle drivers offering island-hopping tours. But when I walked down the same narrow lane toward the shore, the air smelled the same: coconut, diesel, salt. The house was gone. In its place stood a new structure, 2 stories, painted bright yellow, with a sign that said Liza's Cafe and Bake Shop. For a long moment, I just stood there, frozen. Then a woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked older, fuller, her hair streaked with gray, but I knew her instantly. Our eyes met. She paused, the way people do when memory hits them like a soft punch. Then she smiled, not the flirtatious practice smile I remembered, but something steadier, realer. "You came back," she said. "I did," I replied. We sat at one of the tables facing the sea. The place was simple but beautiful: wooden furniture, woven lamps, the faint smell of bread baking. Locals came and went, greeting her warmly. She wasn't the girl from the pier anymore. She was part of the place now. "I read your second book," she said after a while. "You write differently now." I smiled. "I live differently now." She nodded, then looked out at the water. I never forgot what happened. I was ashamed for a long time. But it taught me too. I stopped waiting for someone to save me. I learned to build something on my own. Her words were calm, almost humble. There was no bitterness, no guilt, just the quiet strength of someone who had finally stopped running. "I'm glad you did," I said. "You look happy." "I am," she replied, and this time I believed her. We didn't talk about the past much after that. It didn't need to be dissected anymore. Some things only make sense when you stop trying to explain them. Before I left, I bought a small loaf of bread from her pan de coco, the same kind she used to bring me years ago. She wrapped it carefully, handed it to me, and said, "Take this for the road." As I walked back toward the beach, the sun was setting the same fiery orange that once made me believe in forever. I sat down by the water, broke the bread in half, and ate it slowly. It was warm, sweet, and familiar. I thought about everything that had happened, the loss, the lessons, the years in between. I realized then that forgiveness isn't something you give once. It's something you keep giving in small doses until you're finally free of the story. When night fell, I looked up at the stars and whispered a quiet thank you, not to Liza this time, but to the version of myself who once believed too much. Because without him, I wouldn't have learned the difference between love and illusion, between escape and belonging. I stayed another 2 days on the island, writing in the mornings, walking in the afternoons. On my last night, I left a copy of Paradise Traps on one of the cafe's shelves with a note tucked inside. For the next dreamer who comes here, may you see the beauty, but also the truth. Then I boarded a ferry back to the mainland, watching as the island disappeared behind the horizon, a paradise I no longer needed, but would always carry within me. And for the first time in a decade, I felt not like a man escaping his past, but one finally walking toward home. There's a certain silence that follows you when you've lived through illusion. It's not loneliness, exactly more like a stillness that comes when the noise of wanting finally burns itself out. I've carried that silence with me ever since I left Cebu for the last time. It sits beside me when I write, when I travel, when I meet people who remind me of who I used to be. Sometimes I still dream of the sea. Not the calm, postcard version tourists see, but the real one, restless, alive, and a little dangerous. In my dreams, the waves aren't asking me to stay. They're asking me to remember. Over the years, I've spoken to hundreds of travelers, people from every corner of the world who came to the Philippines, Thailand, Bali, or Cambodia, searching for something their own countries couldn't give them. Freedom, simplicity, connection. They all use different words, but they're describing the same ache. We come here chasing what's missing inside us, thinking a new landscape will rewrite our story. But it never does. The scenery changes. The ache doesn't. Paradise, I've learned, isn't a place you find. It's a test of how honest you can be with yourself once you get there. Some people pass quietly. Most fail spectacularly. I did both. I failed first, of course, by mistaking attention for love and warmth for truth, by thinking a smile could fill the emptiness I carried into every conversation. But I passed later, in my own way, when I learned to look at beauty without needing it to promise anything. Because that's the trick of paradise. It's never been about escape. It's about reflection. The clearer the water, the more you see yourself in it, flaws and all. When I give talks now, I tell people that travel doesn't change who you are. It reveals you. The Philippines didn't betray me. It just showed me the parts of myself that were already broken, my vanity, my longing, my hunger for validation. The island wasn't the lie. I was. That realization hurt at first, but eventually it became a kind of freedom. Because once you stop blaming the world for your illusions, you start seeing it as it is: messy, beautiful, unpromising, real. I still visit the country every year, though I move differently now. I no longer chase beaches or love stories. I stay in small towns, eat in local carinderias, talk to people without expectation. Sometimes they ask about paradise traps. They recognize my name. A few even share their own stories, not about heartbreak, but about how they learned to stand still. Once, in a remote village in Bohol, an old fisherman told me something I'll never forget. We were sitting on a bamboo bench by the shore, watching the tide roll in. He said, "The sea doesn't keep anything, sir. It gives, it takes, it gives again. That's how it stays alive." Maybe happiness works the same way. It's not something you hold on to. It's something that comes and goes, returning in different forms: a quiet morning, a familiar scent, a stranger's kindness. You can't own it. You can only recognize it when it passes through. Sometimes, when I think about Liza, I wonder if she ever walks along that same beach at dusk and thinks of me not out of regret, but out of understanding. I like to imagine she does, just for a moment. Two people separated by time, united by the same mistake, both having found their way to something better. In one of my workshops, someone once asked me, "Would you do it all again if you knew how it would end?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "Yes," I said finally. Because the cost of innocence is always high, but ignorance costs more. There's no paradise without a little pain, no truth without loss, no love worth remembering that doesn't, at some point, break you open. Now, when I stand on a shore anywhere in the world, I no longer see escape. I see return, the endless cycle of coming back to yourself. The tide rises, the tide falls. Somewhere between the two, you find peace. And if there's a moral to any of this, to my story, to our stories, it's that paradise isn't something you lose. It's something you outgrow.